Queen Consort there. Now, world leaders have been converging in London, England, for tomorrow's funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, who died on September the 8th at Balmoral in Scotland. A lot has happened between then and the present, including the accession to the throne and proclamation of her son, Charles, as the next British monarch and head of the Commonwealth of Nations. In the meantime, thousands of mourners from around the world are still queuing up to have a last glimpse of the Queen's body, which has since last Wednesday been lying in state at Westminster Hall, preparatory to tomorrow's committal to Mother Earth. Well, joining us now to continue our coverage of that event is Arise International correspondent Judita Dasilva, who is at Hyde Park, where the funeral procession will pass through. Hi, Judita, it's good to have you with us. Well, it's a somber mood. Can you give us an update where you are at the moment?
Hi, I'm actually standing right underneath the Wellington Arch, which is going to be a key feature in the procession of the Queen's body when it's taken from lying in state in Westminster Hall. So at 6:30 tomorrow morning, the visitors from the public will have to stop, and then there'll be a period until 10:55 when the body is then transitioned onto the state gun carriage. It will be draped, as it has been so far, in the royal standard, as well as the imperial state crown, the orb and the scepter on top. And the gun carriage will carry it down from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey for the funeral service itself. And it will pass through the Wellington Arch, as you can see behind me, where I'm standing. And this entire area will be completely transformed because there'll be security blockades. There'll be the public viewers who are able to get a space here. They'll probably be spooling in over the course of the evening to reserve spaces. And then, as you mentioned, those 2,000 guests would have made their way to Westminster Abbey, 500 of which will be world leaders. So what you're seeing now will be very different to what we see tomorrow morning and over the course of the day tomorrow. And we're pretty much in the nerve center of where the procession will take place.
Very good, Judita. Now, the Queen's funeral will be screened live in parks, squares and cinemas across the UK. A confirmation from the government recently. So that's a full coverage, no doubt, Judita, you think?
It is, because what you're seeing now here is a lot of the news stations are setting up camp in strategic positions, which will take you from the lying in state in Westminster Hall through Victoria Park, all the way to the Mall, to Buckingham Palace, to Windsor Castle, to here. And so because when you think about the eyes of the world will be on Britain tomorrow and on London, it's a lot of logistics to get everyone a space and to get a vantage point for them to actually be able to capture this moment in history. But you're finding that it doesn't matter the distance you have, be it from the pedestrians to civilians to the press to dignitaries to invited guests to anyone else, as long as you get some part, some section of this event, which they've managed to make long enough so that people can apportion their participation in it, it's going to be something to behold. And it's quite a remarkable set of organization, and you have to give credit to the volunteers, to the professionals, to the armed services, to the organizers, to the people doing logistics, and also to the firm, which is the royals, who have kind of had to mastermind the execution of this funeral that everyone knows was organized well in advance by Queen Elizabeth II herself.
Indeed, Judita. And talking about organization, we're seeing random acts of kindness at the queues towards the line in state for the late Queen. Blankets being handed out and washed, and then reused, and then unused snacks donated to food banks. I'd like your thoughts on this ability.
I mean, it's kind of made me think of an interview I saw earlier with Jacinda Ardern, who's already in London. She's the leader of New Zealand, as a lot of other leaders have already started to stream in. That she said she's been taken back by the kindness of people because it's reflective of the sentiment and the esteem with which they held Queen Elizabeth II. Everything they do now is paying respect and showing the reverence they had for her, because they recognize that what she has brought an end to with her life is a time, a way of being. She was very much seen as somebody who did things the way things ought to be done, and they want to reflect that in their actions. And like you said, in that long queue that people are staying in for hours on end, at the longest there was it's a queue being measured in hours as opposed to in yards. At the longest, it was 22 hours to get to Westminster Hall, but people didn't mind. They've had volunteers bringing blankets, as you said. They're sharing the blankets. Even David Beckham, when he was queuing, he shared food, they shared stories. And we've had stories of disabled people who did not want to go in the shorter queue for this disabled because they felt doing this 12 to 13 hours on their own, on their crutches, in their wheelchairs, paid respect to Queen Elizabeth because they were willing to put themselves at that inconvenience because they realized that they're doing something that's greater than themselves for a moment that is bigger than themselves.
Indeed, Judita, still going back to what you said earlier, the Metropolitan Police has warned of vast road closures in central London on Monday, that's tomorrow, and yet the Transport for London is expecting 1 million people to visit the capital for the burial. Have you ever witnessed that kind of scenario, beyond the somber mood before?
The simple answer is no, but there are things that have come close. This is the first state funeral since Winston Churchill. People have been thinking back to the burial of Princess Diana, which brought in millions of people. At a point, there were 50 million people watching around the world. But the actual presence for this, because everyone around the world, when you study history in school, you study the British monarchs. Queen Elizabeth II is a figure of history that students for the rest of time will be studying. And to be alive at such a time and see the pomp, the parade. These are the things that make Britain proud. These are the things that make Britain unique. And Britain knows that they have to show up and show out because the world is watching. And everyone wants a piece of that. So you are getting people flying in from Japan, from America, from Europe, from Africa, because they know this is a time I want to be part of. I want to see it. I want to touch it. I want to be with the people who are part of it. And with, like you said, 1 million people coming in, the Metropolitan Police, Transport for London, and all the local councils, Westminster Council, just have to band together and make it work because this is a moment unlike any other, and failure is just not an option.
Indeed, Judita. Now, it's been a 10-day funeral proceeding, and of course, I guess this is the 9th day, but just how long would the final burial ceremony take place tomorrow, Monday, when the Queen will be finally interned?
Yeah, so from when her body is taken from Westminster Hall and taken on the procession to Westminster Abbey as it passes through Hyde Park, through Wellington Arch just behind me, it will then be taken to the funeral service, which will be overseen by the Dean of Westminster, that's Dr. David Hoyle, and the sermon itself will be given by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and that's Justin Welby. It's going to last just about an hour. At about 11:55, the 5 minutes before the end, the final post will be given, then a minute of silence, and then the national anthem and a final piece played by the Queen's Piper. The whole thing they're running very tightly to time because they know how much needs to be done. That service, an hour in totality. Her body will then be taken on. There'll be a commemorative service for the royal family at St. George's Chapel, and then she'll be interred. So this is all, when you talk about military position, there's going to be nothing quite like this. This is not a wedding. This is not a celebration. This is the encapsulation of history. This is 70 years of history, the longest reigning monarch, active monarch, apart from King Louis, but he was a child for most of that. So when you think about active and serving, no one's done it like Queen Elizabeth II. So when you talk about, we know how Nigerians can be flexible with time. It's not going to be that kind of thing here. It's going to be everything running exactly to order because there are so many moving parts that all have to work in synchronicity.
Indeed, Judita. Now, talking about other issues, King Charles III wasn't the only one with a new title. Prince William also got a new one, and others also got some form of elevation, as it were. So, can you reflect on that?
Yeah, so King Charles III, normally the the next in line to the throne takes the position of the Prince of Wales, the Prince and Princess of Wales. So the former Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have become the new Prince and Princess of Wales. There was a bit of friction from the Welsh people feeling that it's a position that should not be handed to them. It should be earned. But they have done, the shaking of hands, the bedside manner. King Charles III went to Wales. He spoke in Welsh. He gave them a really touching speech. They feel that he's doing the work to ingratiate himself to them. But like you said, there's been a shifting of the guard. It's kind of like when there's a cabinet shuffle, but this is a very high-level cabinet shuffle. But remember, King Charles III is going to be a new kind of monarch, and he hasn't been shy in coming forward about that. He wants a slimmed-down monarchy. He wants a streamlined monarchy. He's very pro the environment and conservation. So a lot of the people that he feels are just dead weight, he will cut out. We know that he was one of the voices that spoke loudest to pushing Prince Andrew into the background after the scandal around Jeffrey Epstein. He's not shy about making the hard decisions, which will be something that plays in his favor as a decisive monarch. But he has to have the kind touch, the gentle touch, the human touch. So finding that balance is what he's going to need to navigate in the early stages as the new monarch and the new de facto head of state. And also he's going to have to find a way to work with Liz Truss, because we are looking at a very different dynamic. We have a man on the throne and a woman in office, as before where we had a man in office and a woman on the throne. So it will be intriguing to watch how he navigates that. But indeed, as you said, the royal family is having its own kind of reshuffle.
Indeed, dynamism and, of course, some shift in tradition, as it were. So, still talking about King Charles III, some people have questioned the relevance of the monarch regarding recent times, especially when it comes to the Commonwealth. And there are issues regarding those countries where the Queen was the head of state, and they're issuing narratives regarding a call for independence from the British monarchy. So how would you describe that current scenario?
That might be the hardest thing that King Charles has to navigate, because part of the things, when you listen to the rhetoric around the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, is how important the Commonwealth was to her, how she held it together, how she navigated difficult times to keep them on board, to keep them supportive. And we've already heard rumblings. We know that when it comes to Australia, Anthony Albanese has not been shy in saying that it's time to emancipate Australia from Britain, but he held on out of respect for Queen Elizabeth. With the passing of Queen Elizabeth II issues a moment of change, and in that moment a lot of things could shift that could detrimentally affect the relevance of the royal family. When you look at Barbados, they have said they're already going to be leaving the Commonwealth. We know Rwanda wants to come in, but you have countries like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and also even Scotland, who is looking to, we know that Nicola Sturgeon is definitely going to be pushing for another referendum. This is a time of flux, and what you need is a steady hand at the ship, because where you have the monarch, a constitutional monarch, they don't have any governmental power. So the true power you have is in your ability to have a social understanding between all the power players, and be able to navigate an understanding between you so they see the relevance of you and the importance to keep that union going. That is where King Charles is going to have to prove himself as a leader, because as we know, we are at a time of unprecedented prolific change around the world, be it socially, politically and economically. If you don't have somebody that knows how to navigate all three, we could see a Britain we might not recognize in 2-3 years time, and that is something that might not play well in the global positioning of what is seen as one of the leading countries in the free world.
A steady hand, no doubt, Judita. Now, still back to currently where you are. We're seeing live pictures at Westminster Hall, where a whole lot of people also gathered trying to see the Queen. So queue times for the line in state are currently at 13 and a half hours, if I'm correct, and may increase just before tomorrow. What does that tell you?
That tells us that the passion for the Queen, the importance of her, and also the love and affection that people have for her has not waned. This has been going on since Wednesday, and it hasn't stopped, and it will continue until 6:30 a.m. tomorrow. When you think about all the things we've discussed, these are things that the dignitaries, the invited, the world leaders, the people in the high halls of power get to participate in, the average person doesn't get that chance. So how does the average person who cares about the Queen, that she's the only monarch they've known their whole lives, how do they show their connection? How do they have that moment? How do they share in this part of history? This is what they do. Like the part in Victoria Park just before you get to Westminster Hall is called the Snake. That alone takes 4 hours to get through. I have seen remarkable stories about children coming with their mothers, mothers coming with their grandmothers, because they've said that even though the young people don't quite understand the importance of what is happening, it's important because it's something they will appreciate in time. In years to come, you will know, where were you when Queen Elizabeth II passed away? What did you do? What did you experience? How did it feel? And you pass these stories on, because imagine when we study in school, we learn about Richard the Lionheart, we learn about Henry VIII, we hear Bonnie Prince Charlie. These are all things you can read about in books. You couldn't breathe, you couldn't smell it, you couldn't touch it, you couldn't taste it. But for this, we can. So when you see our children and grandchildren studying this, you'll know where you were, you'll know how it felt, you know what that piece of time that you captured by yourself with your family members felt like. And that is a precious memory you cannot put into words, you cannot measure tangibly, but you can hold in your heart forever.
Very good, Judita. Now, Camilla, the Queen Consort, recently paid a tribute to the late Queen, saying she carved her own role in a world dominated by men. How would you explain that?
I thought that was actually a very beautiful thing to say, and a good way to encapsulate it, because we know that interview, this tribute that the Queen Consort has paid, will be played in full tonight on British television. When you look at Camilla Parker Bowles, she had a moment where she had to get the world to kind of turn to her favor, and just before the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, she gave her this role, embracing her and accepting her into the fold. And what she's done is kind of put into perspective how she, as a quote-unquote outsider, has seen this woman navigate power. When you think of all the great women that have come to power, whether it's Elizabeth I, who presided over the Golden Age, or even if Angela Merkel, who's seen as a modern-day Elizabeth in what she's presided over in Germany, people tend not to give Queen Elizabeth II her credit, because she had a very unique job to do, where we've even said it on Arise, she reigned but she did not rule. It's a difficult thing to do, because she has been through 14 presidents, 9 popes, and a plethora of prime ministers, and every single one she had to understand, the majority of them were men. She was a woman that rose to power, prominence in the wake of the First World War. She has had to understand the passage of time and the evolution of the different dynamics, while maintaining her relevance, her respect, her importance, and also representing a nation that is seen as a beacon of the forward-thinking world. A woman doing this surrounded by men, powerful men, world-changing men, being able to hold her own, hold her court, hold her ground, while maintaining a distance to know that I do not interfere, but I can influence, is a special ability to have, and she did this for 7 decades. She's truly a remarkable woman. I'm not particularly a monarchist, but I can say that. Give credit where credit is due, and she deserves credit in abundance.
Indeed. Judita Dasilva, Arise international correspondent. Hopefully we'll get more from you in our subsequent bulletin. Always a pleasure to talk with you.